Well, I'm now going to do something I was never allowed to do on wheeler dealers. I can't believe it, we've already hit another snag. Oh, I do love the Aqua Blaster, it's so satisfying. What I don't understand is why on earth the factory wouldn't fix that in the factory. That can't be a good thing. It's not something that I think is something I'd recommend all the time, but as I'm going to do it anyway, I'm just going to say, don't try this at home. Now, I don't remember it, but I may have had a recent bump on my head, or this might be a hallucination, or a fever dream. But I do distinctly remember phoning up Roadrunner for some motor trade insurance, and then somewhere along the way, I ended up talking to a giant squirrel about converting an ice cream van into a fur-covered road trip mobile. Now, whatever happened and however I got myself into this mess, I've now got to actually transform this 1983 Ford Transit ice cream van. Shouldn't be too hard, but the big squirrel did give me a list of nutty things I have to do to this van, starting with actually making it safe to drive around the country. But he also wants me to swap out the diesel engine powered ice cream machine for a tea maker, and also make the seating arrangements better for his massive tail and perhaps the odd passenger. I also need to change the ice cream cones into spanners, add some chimes and some Roadrunner signs, and perhaps most controversially, cover up all of these rather cleverly hand-graffitied, custom-painted characters. Really, just to save on some potentially very expensive copyright infringement lawsuits. I'm going to do that by covering the whole thing in this lovely fur. Now, during my test drive, it was clear that the steering was actually pretty sketchy and the brakes weren't that much better either. The headlights also need some attention. So today, I'm just going to start with all the work needed to get this van street legal again, and then I'm going to chuck it through an MOT just to be sure, even though it's actually old enough not to need one. So let's get it up in the air and have a good look at the steering, the braking systems, and anything else that I can find under there that needs to be done ready for an MOT. Right then, so, seeing as we're here, I guess have a little look at the handbrake, because obviously, as we remember, that doesn't work at all. And there's a pretty obvious reason actually. So you can see here that the handbrake is just clean snapped off on that side. Where does that one go? That one goes all the way along there, and that actually goes into this mechanism. So you can see that basically this side is actually sort of okay, except obviously it's a whole piece that's connected to the other side. Now, I could potentially try and just repair this Bowden cable, but I think it's been here a long time. Looking at the ends, it's quite rusty. You can see there's bits of corrosion here on the outer of the Bowden cable, and if it's corroded on the outside, it's probably corroded on the inside, which is going to bind it all up. So I definitely need to get a new cable, but the question is, where am I going to get one from? Because this is quite old van, actually. It doesn't feel old to me, but actually in the real world, it is actually quite old. So I'm definitely going to have to get one of those. Also, while I'm under here, I can see that obviously the bit holding the exhaust on is no longer holding the exhaust on. Now, to look at the rest of the brakes, I think I'm going to take the wheels off. But before I do that, while it's up in the air, let's have a little look at the steering. Well, before we even get to the steering, it's quite oily under here, but no more than I would expect from an old 80s van. I mean, I could do with a bit of a jet wash and see what's actually leaking after that, because it has been just sat there running and idling for days on end. But when you look at the steering itself, I mean, again, it's on a steering box, which is over here somewhere. So you've got this sort of lever here for the steering box. So you've got the steering shaft all up there, goes down to the steering box, down onto this rod here, and then it goes onto the steering on this side. And then there's a rod that goes all the way along the back here, and then that goes onto the other side. So if I just wobble things a little bit, I can hear some movement more on that side than on this side. So I think probably I'll have a look at the track rod ends, have a look at any kind of ball joints and bits and pieces, because again, they probably all had a bit of a hard life. But I'll have a closer look around here. It doesn't really explain why it's quite so bad. I mean, it could just be the steering box itself. So there is that possibility. That's not brilliant. So you can see there's a bolt at the top here, but the ones on either side aren't there. So presumably when this is moving, the whole thing is moving around. That's a bit terrifying. So I'm glad I saw that before I did all the test driving. Anyway, that can't be a good thing. So we've got loose ball joints in places, obviously, but actually we've got a loose steering box. So I think before I do anything else, I'll tighten all of that up. I'll also have a look at maybe there's a join between the steering box perhaps into the dashboard, maybe that's not helping either. But of course also it's all manual, there's no power steering on this. So I still want to think about that, whether there's a way of doing that easily and simply so it's a bit easier for spanners to drive around the countryside. So okay, so the steering needs some kind of attention, that's fine. Hoping if I bolted everything up, it might actually work a bit better. And as far as the rest of the suspension is concerned, you've got these good old tough leaf springs. They're not going anywhere. They've got thousands of years of life left in them on both sides. The shock absorbers, well, I would say that these dampers are kind of, well, they look okay. I mean, they're basically a little bit corroded, but they look quite robust. There's no weeping and there's no moisture showing, which means they're not leaking, or at least they haven't leaked for a long time, put it that way. So they seem okay as well. And as far as the brakes are concerned at the front, you've got your sort of flexi pipes here. I mean, they look old, but in reasonable nick. And again, the pipes, the solid pipes are actually okay as well. But then actually the calipers on the front, it's got discs on the front, drums on the back. So it's quite sporty, you know, and obviously the only way I'm really going to see inside there is by getting the wheels off. Let's have a look at these front brakes. Well, you know what, I mean, compared to kind of modern vehicles, the calipers are quite small. It's only a single pot, like a big pot, but it's only a single one, and you've only got quite a thick disc, but it's actually small in diameter. So the braking power on this isn't going to be spectacular, to be honest, but it's going to last a long time, and this disc is so thick. And I don't know how long ago it was changed, but there's almost no lip at all that you can perceive on the edge of the disc. So I might just kind of grind that off with a grinder just to make it easier to get the new pads back in. But actually looking at the pads, I mean, this side, just to the eye there, looks slightly thinner than this side, but both got tons of meat still on them. So I think they don't need to be changed, but it'd be nice to know for sure that there's nothing seizing up there. So maybe take everything apart, grease it all up, put it back together again. And I think the front brakes are probably going to be good to go. And I'm guessing the other side will be as good as this, but I will check that. But I think what I'm worried about now is the rear drums. Obviously they don't do so much of the braking, but of course there is a reason why that handbrake cable snapped, and I wonder what it is. That's a little bit too easy. Oh wow, so you can see in here quite a bit of scoring on the inside of the drum here, so really that does need to be changed, or at least machined. I mean, there's still tons of meat on there, so you probably get away with that, but it's going to mess with the calibration of things. But also if you look on, so you can see here, it's really wafer thin on that side, and on this side it's actually much sort of thicker, really thick at the bottom there, a bit thinner there. So these definitely need to be changed, but also the little slave cylinder at the top there. I mean, slave cylinder, I mean, it actually looks in quite good nick. There's no moisture or anything, which is always a terrible sign. So that's good that this is dry. It could be seized slightly on one side, but also maybe the actual mechanism for the handbrake isn't really working. It comes in here, operates down underneath there, can't really see that in there, and obviously it's all kind of held in the springs here. So I think probably when I change the handbrake cable, obviously we'll make sure that we actually change the mechanism as well. It might be easier to do some of that to see what's going on by taking the drive shaft out. You shouldn't have to do that, so we'll see how we get on. But I think definitely some new shoes on here. I think maybe a slave cylinder just to be on the safe side, and obviously our new handbrake cable. Now, one thing I do need to be aware of is our van is on a changeover year. So in 1983, they had this version and then a slightly sportier version at the end. And the way the parts bin worked back in the day is there are a couple of different options when it comes to shoes and slave cylinders. So I need to measure everything now to make sure I get the right width and the right diameter of the bore to make sure I get exactly the right part. It'd be a real pain to get the bits, and of course they don't fit. So it's definitely worth checking at this stage to save you some grief later on. Right then, it's taken a little bit of digging, but I have managed to get hold of some parts for our 1983 Ford Transit. And they're all coming from Germany, but I guess they used to have a factory over there, so perhaps that's why it's easier to get hold of them there than it is over here in the UK. So, I've managed to get some service items. I've got some filters, bits and pieces like that. I've got a fan belt, I've got a cam belt, no idea when that was last changed. And of course I've got the shoes and the pads for the brakes. Also got some springs as well, because I've no idea what the back end of that's going to look like. And I've also got two cables. There were two different lengths for this particular year of van. I've gone for both, just in case, because I haven't got time to faff about. And then the only thing I couldn't get hold of was some drums. Now, this side, so our near side, is actually in pretty good nick. So I think that was actually fine. It's only the offside one that was a bit tricky. So on closer inspection, having given it a bit more of a feel, I mean, it's mostly a flat surface with the kind of grooves or the scoring kind of into that. Obviously something's dropped in here between the actual drum and the shoe, and it's kind of ground the metal away. But I think there's enough contact, enough sort of flat contact, that means that the new shoes are going to do a good job of stopping, which means I think this drum's going to have to be okay for the MOT. So obviously we'll have to be fingers crossed that they're actually going to be able to get the brakes even at least, but I think they should be okay. So I think while I wait for everything else to turn up, I'll do a bit of cleaning. Oh, look at that! Oh, I do love the Aqua Blaster. It's so satisfying. They look good as new. Oh, lovely. Well, they really do look quite spectacular, don't they? Totally transformed, which is lovely, but because it's cast iron, it's likely, or has a tendency to flash rust almost immediately because, of course, there's so many little pores, little bubbles in that iron. If it was aluminium, it would just look amazing and then survive like that for ages. And what was interesting about this whole process of the aqua blasting is these little shots, in this case ceramic beads, are actually kind of shot peening the surface. So it actually makes it more resistant to rust, but still, because it's cast iron, it makes sense to actually protect it. But what I will do, of course, now is paint it, because I'll kind of force myself down that line. And I think I may have some kind of brake paint, caliper paint in stock. And I think, very suitably, it's red. Roadrunner red. Seems ideal. Otherwise, we'll have rusty drums in no time. A little bit of surface cleaner. Brilliant, so all of our new parts have arrived. We've got our service items, got our brake items, even got a pair of new wing mirrors as well, which is brilliant. But I can't believe it, we've already hit another snag. Unfortunately, the cables that I bought, so one of each length, seem to have exactly the same part number, which is obviously not ideal, which means I've either got two of the right one or two of the wrong one, which is probably not brilliant. But let's solder on, let's find out soon enough. Let's get on with the rear end. I can put on some shoes, some springs, and one of these cables. Now our Ford Transit, brilliantly, comes with 3 different axles, and they all have slightly different things about them. Now, looking at this axle here, we basically have F, G and H as a choice, and the F and G have like tubes, if you like, going either side of the diff housing, and then this particular one is an H, because you can tell that quite easily because it's actually pressed steel. I guess it's cheaper, and it's kind of just welded up together. So we know at least we've got the H version, so that's kind of helpful to know. But then when it comes to the actual brakes themselves, they're pretty much the same as most vehicles of this era. So you've got your shoes on either side, you've got one slave cylinder there which is pushing those out, you've got a little bar and which kind of holds the shoes correctly apart, but then also got springs pulling them back together again. And of course, because it's the rear axle, you've got the park brake or the emergency brake, and this cable here is going to go into the back plate around, and then eventually goes onto a lever which you can't see, which is behind this shoe on this side, and then on that side, which you also can't see from here, is some kind of auto adjusting mechanism, like a little ratchet. So obviously when you kind of push the brakes and they go into the drums and they slow the car down, then obviously when they come back to take up the slack, this little ratchet kind of moves on each time. So I imagine it's going to be quite wound up because these are quite thin, or at least it is on this side. So hopefully, to take it all apart, swap them over, all I'm going to have to do is disconnect these springs, so I'll be wearing some eye goggles for that, because frankly it's going to hurt if they come out. And then I've got these little chaps here which hold the shoes in place. That'll be the last thing that I undo, I think, although we'll see how it goes. Basically normally that will kind of help everything move around, so it might be able to get the springs off, but we'll see kind of what happens, because I think the trick is with this is putting everything back together again. So let's crack on. Well, I can actually see the pin there that holds the mechanism, and then I think what's going to happen if I just move this around, yeah, basically I can then remove this spring at the bottom, and that's going to allow it to all kind of come off, hopefully. And the other spring behind there isn't actually a spring, it's the handbrake cable, so we'll come to that in a minute, just in case. So that's the bottom spring. And we've got some movement there. So now, groovy little tool, this little chap here, so basically it just means you can more easily get hold of the cups. And on the back of the back plate here, you've actually got a couple of sort of little pins. They don't have any screw thread or anything, they're just literally like almost like a stud. But if you put that on your finger, you can then turn that. You can see there's like a kind of a hole, there we are, inside there. And that little hole is oval, or sort of elongated if you like, and then it just goes out and locks in position, goes that way and unlocks, which is very handy. Same on the other way. Right then, so now, with any luck, so you can now see underneath here we've got the actual mechanism for the handbrake cable itself, and that is actually quite a simple thing. So again, it's just like a little stop on the end of a rod which goes on the end of a cable. So theoretically, if I just grab hold of, perhaps just, I can get hold of the spring, and get into the spring and slide up a little bit. Then what I'm hoping I can do slide all the way along and then come back. Not quite. There we go. So that now is the bottom of our handbrake cable. And there is one of those little pins that goes in the back plate. It's a new one, so it looks like somebody's actually been looking after this. So that's our handbrake, there's our mechanism there. So now, if you look on this side, we should just be able to tease that off. Got that kind of plate that goes, or the rod that goes in the middle here. So it goes like so, and that'll go in here, and then that's actually operating on that mechanism in there. So that little rod goes into there like so. So that's basically how that mechanism is made. So what I need to do now is transfer these levers and that mechanism onto our new shoes. Just got to make sure that these kind of look about the same, as they seem to, which is good. So you can see that side of the mechanism right there. Essentially, when that pulls that out, you can see it moves. And of course that's pushing that further and further and further out, which is nice. So let's see if we can get that bit off and this bit off. There's one of those. A little washer there as well on top of that. See, like those ones just there. That's back in position. I don't seem to have a new clip, so I'll just put that one back in. I've got a new spring because they're going to be handed. Just about to see the serrations there. Again, I haven't got any new clips on there, so I'll use the old one. Thankfully, they're not very corroded. Just want to make sure that it's actually in the little groove it's supposed to be in. Otherwise it's going to pop out. Very annoying. That seems good. And then that's all working, which is nice. Cool, so that's good. So then that's those two effectively done. It's going to sit like so. So that's going to go like that. That's going to go like that. So you can see there, if I move that handbrake, it pushes the shoe out at the top there. So that's that sorted. So now we want to just change the springs over. Give it a go. Right, so my new shoes and springs are ready, but before I can fit them, I need to sort out our new slave cylinder as well. And I've got the two different versions because again I wasn't sure which one to go for. And you can see actually straight away that it's clearly this one here rather than the smaller one there. So I have a spare for some other van should anybody need it. Now a handy top tip before you start messing about changing over calipers or slave cylinders is to actually just try and stop this reservoir from kind of helping to bleed through, because obviously the cap is designed to actually let air in and out, obviously as the fluid expands and shrinks, and so therefore it would drain away slowly. So once you've opened one end of the sort of brake system basically is just going to drain out. So we can slow that down a little bit, hopefully. I mean, it might not stop it altogether, but especially with a system like this where it's mostly sort of solid or hard pipes rather than flexies, which you can clamp. I'm just going to use either a little bit of cling film, or in this case I'm actually using some sort of slightly wider electrical insulation tape. And then I'm just going to pop that back on again. And then this way there'll be a nice tight seal, and as long as I work nice and quickly at that end, hopefully we won't spill too much brake fluid. Right then, so obviously to get our slave cylinder off, I'm going to need to disconnect it from the hydraulic line, which means fluid's going to go everywhere, which is why I've done my little top tip. But also I've got my mirror here just so I can see what's going on, because frankly it's a little bit difficult to get into, and I can see that the nipple is actually quite far into our cylinder there, so that's actually not so bad, not in the way. And I can obviously see also I'm going to need to be able to get to the end of that ferrule, if you like. Now obviously to undo that you could just use a normal spanner, but as always just use a brake spanner, because you end up with 4 and 2 bits as it were of sides being held, so all the corners are actually held on, which is rather good, so it's actually going to work a lot more efficiently. So I'm just going to grab it on there, and also this should be, oh, there, that's not too bad actually. This should be connected or attached to the back plate with a little sort of spring washer thing. So okay, so it looks like we've actually got some kind of movement here. And what I'm going to try and do is actually whiz this back on as quickly as possible. So I've just taken out the dust cover, and then I'm ready, and that'll minimise the loss. Now hopefully this will all be finger tight. I'm going to bleed it anyway, but I don't want to get stuff everywhere all over the floor. It wasn't that bad. Still quite a bit of fluid everywhere, but hey. Right. And just brake cleaner after I'm mopping it up. Now sometimes when you're doing this you'd actually have to take the bleed nipple out just to make sure that you don't damage when you're tightening it up. And the clip. What could have been slightly easier, something I forgot to mention earlier, is a little top tip, is when you're trying to fit a C or E clip to something like that, actually fit it first to kind of stretch it to the tiny winny bit, and then in a difficult place like that you eventually get it into position. But hopefully that's all going to do its job. So the next thing, before I put my new shoes assembly sort of back in place, I'm actually just going to now change the cable here. So I'm going to, first of all, when I think about it, is just basically just put a little bit of penetrating fluid on that little bit there. And looking at the new one, or one of the new ones, it's kind of interesting. So we've got, just like this end is obviously it's going to pop into there, it just pushes in by the looks of it. But then what's interesting is it's actually got sort of like two gaps. Obviously we've only got one where the actual kind of, this is going to sit on this sort of little yoke, if you like, that goes off the handbrake itself, or the handbrake lever. And it looks to me like this can actually be sort of handed either side. So I literally it's got a thread here on either side, so it can either be screwed on that way, or I guess it could be screwed that side, which is kind of interesting. So I think the other side, or the near side, is actually slightly longer than the off side. So it's quite neat, but this is cool because this way it doesn't matter which way you fit it, because it will still fit, theoretically. So let's hope it's actually long enough. So first thing, let's just see if we can get this out. Well, that's actually quite nice and easy. So that's good. Bodes well. Well, that's great. So that goes in there, and that's just going to drop across there. And of course, again, we've got that little spring on the end, so we can just peel that back and effectively then obviously get that over the little lever. So that's now in position, which is good. But now I'm here hanging into this. I think I'll actually just pop the car up a little bit more and try and route it around on the inside. Well, first up, I can see I've got little clips just here and here, and also another one down there. So if I remove these R clips, I'm hoping that then I can start discombobulating, because that cable's going to have to go around there, so of course that's actually in the way. Work that round. Lovely. That gets rid of the old one. Okay. So now I'm just going to do that one up a little bit. It's looking excellent. So now we just have to put our yoke back in position. Right, and so now what I need to do is obviously get our nice little handbrake end into our new shoes. I'm just going to ease that over the top, but not easily. So I'm going to try and get that. What I might do is just try and clamp just along there a little bit, so just go all the way back. Right, so at least now I've got a fighting chance getting onto there. You know what, I'm going to have to go even more. Right, so that's that in position. So then I've got to get that into position on there. And we're not quite aligned. Obviously, always check that first. Okay, so that's in position. That's now in position. And now would be a really good time to have one of these new pins and our special little tool. Oh. Oh. There we go. It's in. Well, they're a bit of a pain, but they do obviously hold the shoes where they're supposed to be, which is a good thing. So that's that one done. So now, just got to make sure that the other side sits properly too. Now an alternative is just to use some, well, you've got to be a bit more careful with that, I guess, but sometimes it means you can see a bit better. Whew, right, okay, so now, one of the things that to be a bit careful there is that that bar that kind of links our two little mechanisms that goes onto the kind of auto adjusting mechanism actually uses the back of the back plate there to actually kind of push on that, keep it in position. So now that's in position, now that's in position, I think we're in a pretty good place. So now we should be able to put everything back to, oh, one more spring, mustn't forget the one more spring. Smashing. So now, I've got all the springs in the right position. So now hopefully when I put my foot on the pedal, once we've bled it, it's actually going to open and work beautifully. So now I can just pop on a drum. I think we're ready to go. Interesting little modification here. You see it's actually been welded on, so that'll be quite fun. I have to cut that off. Could use a nylock, I guess. It wasn't just terrible welding. Just might get away with it. And obviously, this little chap here should be like one of those. I haven't got one of them, so I might just use for now a bolt and a little bit nylock nuttage. Should definitely stay in position for a while, if not forever. Lovely. Well, I'd say we're a bit more than halfway through the brakes. Now the rears are done and looking very, very spangly, but of course that's made a bit of a rod for my own back because now these calipers are looking a little bit shoddy. So it might be quite nice to take those off and give them a good clean. But I did them a bit of a disservice earlier on because I said that's actually a single pot caliper. Actually, it's twice as good as that. It's got two cylinders, one either side. And in fact, you can actually tell that because it's got the one bleed nipple, because in fact, there is an actually sort of slightly sportier braking system available on the Ford Transit. And that is a 4-pot caliper, a 4-cylinder caliper. And that you can tell because it has 3 bleed nipples, one sort of either side and one at the top. So it should be slightly easier to fix. And I think we're actually looking at this, the pad's actually looking pretty good nick anyway, but we'll take it all apart and have a better look. Just not crush that. clearly my tape bit thing didn't really work quite so well. For these sort of banjo fittings, there should be a coffer washer either side. What I'm going to do now, just try a little top tip here. I'm just going to put a bit of tape again over the top. I'm going to put some washers either side, and I'll just see if I can get a clamp it shut. I could, at this point, clamp the hydraulic pipe, but I think this might actually work better. Probably. Magic, look at that. Well, it seems to have worked, which is nice. I've managed to get hold of a whole load of fibre washers there, and the idea is I'm actually going to put this back into the caliper because I want to clean the caliper with the aqua blaster, and so this way it's going to stop any of those little ceramic beads getting into the braking system, because I really don't want that to happen. But I really do want it clean. Now, while it's still attached to the vehicle, I'm just going to basically get the pins out, and then you can see that somebody's actually, well, they're bent because they have to be, just get them into the position. So I'm just going to try and remove those, and then I'm hoping I can then get those out easily. It's just obviously less stuff to clean, but I might leave the pads in place when I do the cleaning again, because it might be quite useful just to try and protect the rubber seals on the pistons. Working, it's good. That's interesting. So they are a little bit rusty, but we'll see what the other one's like. So this one is a little bit tricky, a little bit stuck. I'm hoping that the actual cylinder itself isn't too seized, or seized at all actually, but clearly it needs a bit of cleaning in there and stuff. So I think what I'll do is I'll just get the whole thing off if I can, and maybe I'll give you more access. It's just held on with 2 bolts on the back here. Right then, well, let's get it clean at least, then we can see what's going on. Oh, another triumph from the Aqua Blaster. Look at that. Oh, beautiful. So it is actually cast iron. Tell that by the weight. Just going to take the paint beautifully. Lovely. Just the right temperature. So while I've been sitting here watching the paint dry and supping a cold cup of tea, I am just getting increasingly concerned about those drums. Now I know I said that they're going to be probably fine for the MOT, which is probably the case, but I don't really want to be responsible for sort of sending spanners to his doom on the open road. And I think also the chance of getting those brand new drums back anytime soon is quite slim. So I think the best thing to do is actually to get them skimmed. And that way, not only will I get rid of those grooves that are in the sort of the outside of the drum, but also if they're slightly oval, which is highly likely in a car this age, then actually sort that out as well. So I'm just going to get them down to my mate Steve and see if he can sort them out for me. Yeah, what's that nice paint?
What's the paint, yeah.
I mean, really, I was thinking, you see, I was thinking we were going to get another one in time, like some new ones, but I actually thought this is nicer. We can actually fix it. This is much better.
Yeah. Lovely.
That's clever, yes. Yeah. So, okay, so you've made a centre for that's actually in the chuck, and then you've then got this other bit, which will now pushes it all in. So now it's running very true. Look at that. It's lovely.
But so, however that drum's running,
yeah,
we're going to correct that. So now what we've got to do, because they might both vary, I'll touch the back, right figure.
Oh, okay, just so yeah, so we know what the backstop is.
And
yeah.
then I've got to write a little program.
Lovely.
To just give me the movements I need, and then I'll just mess around with the tool compensation until it cleans for you.
Because we literally only need to take off just the light.
Bare minimum,
yeah.
You might be surprised how much you've got to take out of that to get it to clean.
And probably here also if it's slightly oval as well. That's the other thing as well, because you'd.
Yeah, so we'll take that out. Got to just. So I was going to change that tip, wasn't I? We were going to change the tip.
Will it be alright? I mean,
Yeah, I'll do that in a second.
oh, okay.
It'll come up pretty well. Just creeping up on this.
With the lovely sound of carving cast iron.
So we look at, I'll say what was 2.310. Okay. And then we'll put a rad in the corner.
So,
Looks like that's about 40 thou. Yeah.
lovely.
That's what we can do on these. So, let's write a program. 04 rad. Look at the shape. There's the part. There's the part. Single step. All brought out nice and safe.
That's very cool. Thanks, sir. That's how you do it properly.
Yeah. Oh, you might put that in.
I might do, if that's alright.
That's all right, mate. So what I'm going to do now,
Change the tip.
change that tip.
What's your favourite? I mean, because aluminium and brass are very different things. I mean, depending on the alloy, alloy can be nice to cut or
Oh, it can be all puddingy and horrible,
Yeah.
stringy. Yeah, you just.
stringy and puddingy. I love that. All right, so how do you describe cast iron then?
It's quite soft, you know. But it can be quite abrasive on your tools.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to set up. I'll go into the tool compensation 16, and I'll back her off just for safety. I'm going to go -0.03. Just to make sure I go through the pattern and also
Okay, so this is actually yeah, I can have it there. So now you just change the tool. You can change how it's being compensated.
I can back it off. And then I can run through by hand and carefully put it back to 0. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to see what size it is when it touches. Yeah. So I'm just going to give that a little touch in here somewhere. That's going to look good. That's going to look good. Right, so what I'm going to do, that's 910. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into setup and I'm going to say tool setup 16 plus 15 thou. Right, so that should be taking about 5-6 thou.
Okay.
I'll show you the coming and going.
Yeah.
What's he doing it like that for?
Well, I would imagine it's easy just to use an angle grinder and a big drill, wouldn't it?
Let's see. So you've obviously at the front there, you've got a horrible
Yeah.
bit, and then it will go in here.
It's some way off cutting still, isn't it? Oh, there you go. So it is slightly off, isn't it? It's, and I guess you'd probably feel that in the brakes as well, wouldn't you? I mean, you feel the kind of the pulsing. So I have to say, I didn't feel when I drove it.
No. But you can get, when they get really bad, if you get anything over about 2 thou around, you can have situations where you can lock your handbrake.
Oh wow, okay.
Or lock your back brakes because they end up stuck out in the big bit.
No, of course, yes. There you can't actually go around, yeah.
So that's a little your initial. So what would you do? Speed that up?
I probably will, yeah. We'll ramp it up.
You can do each cut,
Yeah.
and then you can see it's that, and then we'll do another cut. I'll probably take another 10.
Yeah, okay.
And that will come out.
I might just put them on shape. Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Right, so. Okay. We're going. This will be the second cut, another 10 thou. So we can do another. Yeah, it's getting better, isn't it? So we do another 10 thou. Just want to get that front bit cleaned out there. You've got to take a fair. If you want that gone, I've got to take a little bit more, maybe as much as 20 thou. But
well, I might.
you're right.
Yeah, no, to be honest though, but that's probably just to help get it in, isn't it?
Well, what you found with some of these transits, they used to get a hell of a lift, and then people grind it all out.
Okay, so. Oh, I think. Yeah, I mean, there's no.
I mean, it won't hurt to have it all nice.
No, okay.
They're pretty forgiving.
Yeah. Pretty much there, isn't it? I think it's just the last cut, is it?
Cut, yeah. So we're going to go. It's very badly worn, that one.
Yeah. So how much have we taken off altogether?
Well, if they were 9 inches to start with, there's 65 thou. It'd be right. But we probably don't need to go do that to the apple.
No.
Because obviously that's had a hard life, that one.
Yeah.
It might have been jammed on at some time.
I think so. Well, they go with the scoring because there's also a pin missing for the handbrake mechanism.
Yeah.
So I have to replace it with a bolt in the end, which I'm not bolt, which I'm not entirely happy with, but we'll see.
Yeah, that's lovely, now that. That's it.
All right, look at that, amazing. Oh yeah, you do that first, yeah.
Okay, so then
Go.
just go down the back now and make sure that I don't attach it to the back.
Oh yeah. So now we know where the datum again at the back
Oh
is.
no, I'm not going to crash into the
Right.
back one. So what I do now is move that set up away again. I'm going to put it at 0.01, 10 thou up. Well, I was 65 thou up on that one. So we're going to.
So we're just going to just for a light skim.
Yeah. So. I know so I'm going to go in here. You might not touch. But
So it's very oval there. So it was worth doing, even though it looked fine. Actually, it's not in great shape.
You can turn it round, and if it's coming and going in two places, pull it out the overlay.
It's quite a chunk actually. I mean, it's sort of one. Oh no, it is 2 pounds. Yeah. Cool. That's good. So it's going to be the best Ford Transit ice cream van ever for stopping. Hopefully.
A little bit there.
Just a tiny bit left. That's lovely. That sounds a lot better. It is a thing of beauty.
Okay, out there, yeah?
Yes, please. And the paint is intact as well. Look at that, amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you, sir. That's fab. These look so good on the outside and now on the inside, thanks to the skimming, and they're even going to stop the van properly too. Lovely. So now our drums are in place. Obviously the next thing I need to do is obviously reconnect the handbrake cable. Now because obviously the drums are now in position, all the springs are in place, it's actually quite hard to pull this back so that actually it meets the rod in the middle, because you can see there, it's about, I don't know, maybe only a centimetre gap, but I can't really pull it enough. So I've got a cunning idea. So I'm just going to use a socket, just pop that in there like so, and then just use the same kind of caliper spreader we used on the front there. And then effectively hoping I can kind of wind this out slightly clumsily, but I think it's going to work. Better than using a ratchet strap or something. And I'm hoping that way now we're actually going to get a little, just enough tension just to start the thing going. And then let's have a look. So, oh. nearly. Okay. Aha. So now it's a right-hand thread, so should I wind that on? It should wind the other one on at the same time. Did it. Brilliant. Okay, so I can now wind up a little bit more. Now the thing is, I don't know quite where things have got to be, but at least now that's attached. So then what I want to do is obviously finish the front brakes, and I can bleed the whole system. And once all the system's bled, I know everything's in the right place. Obviously give the brakes a number of pumps during that process, and that way at least all the shoes are going to kind of center themselves and everything. And of course the pads will also end up meeting obviously on the disc. So then once we've got that far, then we can come back here and actually then set the handbrake properly. So it's going well, the rear brakes are done, so let's crack on with the front ones and get them in place as well. So first of all, just going to remove all the masking tape I put on here just to try and stop the bits where the pads are actually going to end up. And then just take off my cunning little jig just to hold things. When I was taking everything apart, two of the pads, so one on each caliper, were actually quite stuck in. It looked like everything was a bit seized, but actually it was the pad not wanting to get rid of, or not wanting to sort of sit right, if you like, in the caliper. And on closer inspection, you can see, looks like, I mean it's difficult to tell for sure, but it looks like the casting is actually possibly slightly at fault. So it's sort of like there's like a flash line, a kind of where there's a seam in the mould that's sort of actually just getting in the way, allowing some extra material. Now what I don't understand is why on earth the factory wouldn't fix that in the factory. Why would they put out a product that doesn't work? But I'm hoping I can actually make this work better. So in fact, I'll tell you what I'll do, I'll just do this one as well, because clearly it wants to fall over. So what I'm thinking I'm going to try and do, I'm just going to put the new pads, it could be just like a Duff cheap set of pads maybe, so it might not be all down to the manufacturers. But if it's actually, I've got some pretty good OEM spec pads, so hopefully they should fit okay. And there is definitely a right way and a wrong way to fit them. It's difficult to say until I actually hold it up to you, but there's essentially, I guess, a leading edge and a trailing edge, as you'd kind of expect. Right, so if you look there, you can see this one is actually a bit longer than this side, and so the pad has a little hook over this side here. So what should happen if I pop the pad in from the top, then this is the wrong way. Let's go around that way. So it should fit in there like so. And the other side is correct. So that little kind of hook just there, that should go in there like so. But you can see, well, maybe you can't see from here actually, it's quite tight. But there's actually a bit of an issue. So this pad, this one here, you can see it's just moving backwards and forwards, sort of rocking around. It's obviously it's sort of curved either side. It's like a sort of edge of a circle. So that's actually fine. That's moving around. You're not going to move that much when it's driving, but you want a bit of movement. Otherwise, it's all going to jam up. When I put this one in, it doesn't seem to want to sit quite where it's supposed to go, and then it just kind of locks up. So it's not something that I think is something I'd recommend all the time. But as I'm going to do it anyway, I'm just going to say, don't try this at home. But I am just going to get a little bit busy with the old die grinder and just remove just a little bit of the material. I'm not going anywhere near the cylinders or anything like that. I'm not going anywhere important. It's just basically the casting that holds the pad. But I can't take off too much. But I just want to try and make it smooth to get rid of this step. Really as little as possible actually. So this was the good side. There you go. I mean literally it's just, I don't know, not even half a mil. I mean it's a pretty sharp tool, but that's all it took. So basically, it's just to get it to move like the other side does. So it's just a little bit of actual movement there. And then before I all put it together, because obviously this kit comes with some new pins and springs as well, I'm also just going to get a little bit of brake grease and just put it on that metal surface on either side. So it doesn't get anywhere near the brake friction material, it doesn't get anywhere near the disc. It just sits very, very thin layer, just enough just to keep that movement so it doesn't kind of bind up, and then that way we should have amazing front brakes as well as our amazing new back brakes. This is special grease that's designed for exactly this sort of thing, for assembling your brake parts. So literally a light smear, that should be all that's necessary. I could even put a little tiny bit on the back as well. Oh, lovely. That is going to work an absolute dream, hopefully. There we go. Cool. What I'll do is I'll put them on or try and wiggle them into place. We may have to adjust some things, but I think we're pretty good. I might have to open them up a little bit as well. In fact, I won't do that just yet. I'll wait till we're completely sorted and we know it's definitely okay. A little bit more on both sides actually. It's amazing, just a little tiny bit, it's just enough. But it's one of those things where it's not something you really want to be doing, but I think in this case it's clearly what the problem was before. So rather than mess around with the pads, this way it fixes the problem permanently, so that any time we put new brakes in, it's going to be just fine first time round. But why on earth would a manufacturer, even though of course this might be an aftermarket product, actually allow something out of the door that isn't going to work? Look at that. So we now have our pads in our calipers, look shiny and new. I can stick them back on the car. Awesome. Definitely could do with a bit of a bleed. Look at the colour of that liquid, it's nasty. Positively tarty. They really do look very good, don't they? Putting the rest of the vehicle to shame, but I guess we've got to start somewhere. Not sure how well this particular trick worked. Well, yeah. Just going to replace the copper washers just to be on the safe side. Good. Normally you get a screwdriver or something in here, but these are quite a bit thicker and too short enough. That'll be fine. We are so close. So we now have our new pads, new shoes. We've got a nice shiny new metal bits as well. And of course we have a working handbrake. So what I need now is some actual brake fluid to make it all work. Now, obviously what you should do anyway with a car, particularly like this one, the workshop manual says every 36,000 miles, every 2 years, you need to change your brake fluid. And that matters because brake fluid, unfortunately, is hygroscopic. It basically absorbs moisture from the air, and then that lowers the boiling point, which then means when you really stand on the brakes, when you're really going to count on them the most, then unfortunately, some of that liquid turns to gas, and that gas is then compressible, so then you lose the brakes and you end up careering off into a ditch. So it's vital that you do that bit of servicing regularly. It's as important as changing the oil in your engine, frankly. And I have heard horrible stories where garages, maybe less reputable ones, have actually syringed out the fluid from the reservoir so it looks all clean when they put the new stuff in, but actually they haven't bled anything through, which means, of course, if that happens a couple of years in a row, or a couple of seasons in a row, as it were, then you're going to end up with really, really terrible brakes that aren't going to actually stop you. So make sure that that gets done absolutely properly and bled all the way through. And it's something you can do at home, except normally you wouldn't do it on your own. Because of course back in the day we'd have had Paul, for example, standing on the pedals going up and down while I was cranking away at the bleed nipples. But it's Thursday night, I've got to get this done and I'm on my own. So I'm going to be using my trusty old solution from Sealy. So I've just got like a pressurized vessel here. That's going to be pushing brand new clean DOT4 fluid into my reservoir here. And then I can collect it at the other end, all the nasty stuff that's going to come out along with the air, obviously at each of the bleed nipples. And as always, when you're bleeding the hydraulic brake system on a car, you want to start the furthest away slave cylinder or bleed nipple away from your reservoir. So in this case, it'll be the far sort of corner, if you like, the near side rear, then the offside rear, then the near side front, and then the offside front. So when it comes to connecting my pressure vessel to my reservoir, I'm going to be going through the reservoir lid. But unfortunately, ours is quite old. Now you can get all kinds of different fittings for all the standard modern stuff. You can even get a kind of a universal fitting that kind of just clamps round down. But unfortunately, it's so small and so old, I've actually managed to rummage around and find an old cap with a hole in the top from a long, long, long time ago. I've adapted it so it now attaches to here. So hopefully this is going to hold and isn't going to spray brake fluid all over the place while I'm bleeding the brakes. I want to be very gentle, but fingers crossed it's going to work. Now, going by the level left in my reservoir, my magical top tip didn't entirely work. I think I needed possibly a slightly better seal. But there we go, it's all right. I've obviously been bleeding stuff all over the floor. I had to bleed the whole system anyway, so I'm going to try a different method next time. Anyway, to pop that in place like so, and then I'll just pop that in there because I have to go up in the car, and then I'll just pressurise this. You can see make sure we've got no gaps anywhere. Okay, so hopefully any second now, when I start cracking off the nipples, we're going to end up with brake fluid in our system. That's a good slug of air there. Well, I think that's it. I think we've managed to get rid of all the bubbles and all the old fluid. So now we should be good to go. Right then, so now all I have to do is let off the pressure just by pushing a little button. Look at that. Fantastic. And our reservoir is already full up with fluid. What I think we could do now is we could just wind that up while spinning the drum, and then I think we'll find it will suddenly stop. Okay, I would say about there. So I'm going to back off a little bit. I've now got a light drag, so I'll just check the handbrake inside. Brilliant. So it just needs a tiny tweak. Lovely, and then we can do it up. And we have a working, hopefully, handbrake. See what the MOT station have to say about that. Lovely. And of course, mustn't forget the spring. Well, that's the adjuster nice and tight on the handbrake. So now that's perfectly set. Now, back in the day, I remember it used to be about 3 to 7 clicks on the handbrake ratchet, and then I think you're supposed to get about 16% of the overall braking ability on the emergency brake. It may have changed by now, and maybe that number is completely fiction. I can't remember. But I've just noticed also there's a little graph stuck to the side of the driver's seat pedestal, which actually tells you what the braking is supposed to be on the handbrake, which is quite useful. So one way or the other, I think with our new, nicely kind of machined drums, they're going to work beautifully. I need to bed them in a little bit, so I will go the long way round to the MOT station to make sure that the brakes have got a bit of a fighting chance, but they're looking very smart and very sorted. And the last thing I need to do really on that is just put the wheels back on, but before I do that, I might just try and see if I can find some bolts for the steering box. Well, I'm now going to do something I was never allowed to do on wheeler dealers. I'm actually going to go to the expense of using some brand new shiny wheel nuts. Can you imagine? Oh, look at that. Again, I'm kind of showing up the van, but I think it's worth it. Well, after some very satisfying jobs, the brakes are now completely sorted, although you can't actually tell thanks to the solid wheels, although my shiny new nuts may give it away a little bit. But the main thing is now when you get in the cab and go for a drive, you'll actually be able to stop with some confidence, in fact with some urgency perhaps, and you'll even be able to park on a hill. What a novelty. So at least we're some way down the road to getting all the stuff done for the MOT. We just have to sort out the headlights, the floppy mirrors, and I probably need to give it a bit of a service as well, but of course all of that is a job for another day. Right now, I need a tea urn.